The late afternoon sun, a molten orange orb bleeding into the dusty horizon, cast long, distorted shadows across the manicured lawns of Oak Ridge Estates. It was a picture-perfect scene, the kind of suburban idyll advertised in glossy brochures, complete with identical beige houses, precisely trimmed hedges, and the faint, rhythmic whir of sprinklers. But behind the facade of tranquil conformity, a storm was brewing. I, Eleanor Vance, stood on the porch of my own home, a two-story colonial that, while adhering to the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines, possessed a certain understated elegance that the other cookie-cutter dwellings lacked. It was my sanctuary, a place I'd painstakingly crafted over years, filled with the warmth of family memories and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Across the neatly paved street, a figure approached, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. It was Patricia Holloway, the self-appointed queen bee of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association, or HOA, as it was more commonly known. Patricia, with her tightly permed hair, perpetually pursed lips, and an air of officious authority, was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who found her purpose in enforcing the minutiae of the neighborhood's bylaws with an almost religious zeal. "Eleanor," she announced, her voice a clipped, nasal drawl that carried across the quiet street, "we need to talk." I sighed inwardly. Patricia's talks were never casual, never friendly. They were always laced with accusations, demands, and the thinly veiled threat of HOA sanctions. "Patricia, it's late," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "Can't this wait until tomorrow?" "No, it cannot," she retorted, her eyes narrowing. "This is a matter of utmost urgency." She marched up my walkway, her heels clicking on the concrete, and stopped a few feet from me, her posture rigid, her expression severe. "We have received numerous complaints about your landscaping," she began, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your rose bushes are overgrown, your lawn is slightly uneven, and your petunias are, frankly, a disgrace." I raised an eyebrow. "My petunias are a disgrace?" I repeated, incredulous. "Patricia, they're award-winning petunias." "That's beside the point," she snapped. "The point is, they violate the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. And we cannot tolerate such blatant disregard for the rules." "The rules?" I echoed, my voice laced with a hint of amusement. "Patricia, you're talking about petunias." "I'm talking about maintaining the standards of Oak Ridge Estates," she insisted, her cheeks flushed with indignation. "We have a reputation to uphold. We cannot allow individual homeowners to sully that reputation with their horticultural transgressions." "And what, precisely, do you propose I do about these transgressions?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "You will remove the offending plants," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "You will trim your rose bushes to the approved height. You will level your lawn. And you will do it within 48 hours, or face the consequences." "Consequences?" I asked, a smile playing on my lips. "What kind of consequences?" "Fines," she stated, her eyes flashing. "And, if necessary, legal action." "Legal action?" I repeated, my amusement turning to disbelief. "Patricia, you're threatening me with legal action over petunias?" "I am threatening you with legal action over your blatant disregard for the rules of this community," she corrected, her voice rising. "And if you think I'm bluffing, you're sadly mistaken." She turned to leave, her back ramrod straight, her heels clicking on the walkway. "Consider this your final warning, Eleanor. Comply, or face the consequences." As she walked away, I couldn't help but shake my head. Patricia's obsession with control was both comical and infuriating. She treated the HOA like her personal fiefdom, ruling with an iron fist and a complete lack of perspective. The next morning, I woke to the sound of lawnmowers and hedge trimmers. The Oak Ridge Estates landscaping crew, under Patricia's watchful eye, was hard at work, ensuring that every blade of grass, every leaf, every petal, adhered to the HOA's rigid standards. I watched them from my kitchen window, sipping my coffee and contemplating my next move. Patricia's threats, while absurd, couldn't be ignored. She had a knack for making life difficult for anyone who dared to challenge her authority. I decided to pay a visit to the Oak Ridge Estates Community Center, the heart of the HOA's operations. It was a small, nondescript building, tucked away in a corner of the neighborhood, filled with filing cabinets, meeting rooms, and the ever-present air of bureaucratic tedium. Inside, I found Patricia presiding over a meeting of the HOA board, her voice echoing through the room as she lectured her fellow members on the importance of maintaining property values. "Ah, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as I entered. "What a pleasant surprise. To what do we owe the honor of your presence?" "I've come to discuss your concerns about my landscaping," I replied, my voice calm and even. "Concerns?" she echoed, her eyes narrowing. "They're not concerns, Eleanor. They're violations." "Violations of what, exactly?" I asked, pulling up a chair and settling into it. "The HOA bylaws." "Precisely," she replied, her voice smug. "And we take those bylaws very seriously." "Do you now?" I asked, a smile playing on my lips. "Because I have a feeling you're about to learn that you don't know the half of it." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. The folder contained the original deeds, blueprints, and legal documents for Oak Ridge Estates. Documents that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I, Eleanor Vance, owned not just my house, but the entire neighborhood. Patricia's eyes widened, her jaw dropped, and the room fell silent. The other HOA board members stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. What is this?" Patricia stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "This," I replied, my voice ringing with quiet authority, "is proof that I own Oak Ridge Estates. Every house, every street, every blade of grass. It's all mine." Patricia's face turned a shade of crimson that I had never seen before. She looked like she was about to explode. That's impossible," she sputtered. You can't own the entire neighborhood." "Oh, but I do," I replied, my voice laced with amusement. "My grandfather, Thomas Vance, was the original developer of Oak Ridge Estates. He built this neighborhood from the ground up, and when he passed away, he left it all to me." But the HOA," she stammered. "The bylaws, the rules." "The HOA," I interrupted, my voice sharp, "is a voluntary organization. And the bylaws? They were created by my grandfather, and they can be changed by me." Patricia's face crumpled, her carefully constructed facade of authority crumbling before my eyes. She looked like a deflated balloon, all the air sucked out of her. You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't just take over." "I'm not taking over," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I'm simply reminding you who's in charge. And I'm reminding you that you've overstepped your bounds." But the landscaping," she protested, her voice weak. "The petunias?" "The petunias," I replied, my voice laced with amusement, "are staying. And if you have any further complaints, you can take them up with me." I stood up, gathered my documents, and turned to leave. "Consider this your final warning, Patricia. Comply or face the consequences." As I walked out of the community center, I could feel the weight of Patricia's stunned silence behind me. I knew that my revelation had shaken her to her core, that her carefully constructed world of control had been shattered. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I met with the Oak Ridge Estates landscaping crew, informing them that their services were no longer required. I met with the HOA board, informing them that their services were also no longer required. And I met with the residents of Oak Ridge Estates, informing them that they were now living in a community where the rules were a little more relaxed. The response was overwhelmingly positive. The residents of Oak Ridge Estates were tired of Patricia's petty rules and her constant meddling. They were tired of being told what they could and couldn't do with their own homes. Within a week, the landscape of Oak Ridge Estates began to change. The identical beige houses were painted in a kaleidoscope of colors. The precisely trimmed hedges were replaced with wild, flowering bushes. And the perfectly manicured lawns were transformed into lush, vibrant gardens. The neighborhood, once a symbol of conformity, became a symbol of individuality, a place where people were free to express themselves, to be themselves. Patricia, meanwhile, had retreated into a stunned silence. The revelation that the very ground she stood on, the houses she so meticulously regulated, belonged to Eleanor Vance had shattered her carefully constructed reality. She was a general without an army, a queen without a kingdom. The power she had wielded with such relish had vanished, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. For days, she remained sequestered in her house, the blinds drawn, the phone unanswered. The once imposing figure was now a shadow, a ghost haunting the very streets she had once policed. The other residents, emboldened by Eleanor's actions, began to ignore the remaining vestiges of the HOA's rules. They painted their houses in vibrant hues, erected whimsical garden gnomes, and even dared to park their cars on the street overnight, a transgression that would have previously earned them a sternly worded letter and a hefty fine. The transformation of Oak Ridge Estates was not merely aesthetic, it was a cultural shift. The stifling atmosphere of conformity was replaced by a sense of liberation. People began to interact with each other in ways they hadn't before. Spontaneous barbecues popped up in backyards, impromptu street parties erupted on warm evenings, and the sound of children's laughter, once a rare occurrence, now filled the air. Eleanor, meanwhile, became an unlikely figurehead, a reluctant leader of this newfound community. She didn't seek power or adulation. She simply wanted to create a place where people could live without fear of arbitrary rules and petty tyrants. She organized community meetings, not to dictate terms, but to listen to the residents' ideas and concerns. She facilitated the creation of a new, more inclusive community association, one that focused on fostering a sense of belonging and mutual respect, rather than enforcing rigid regulations. The old HOA bylaws were replaced with a simple set of guidelines, emphasizing common sense and consideration for neighbors. Disputes were resolved through mediation, not litigation. And the focus shifted from maintaining property values to enhancing the quality of life for all residents. One afternoon, a few weeks after the upheaval, Eleanor was tending to her now famous petunias when she saw Patricia approaching. Patricia's posture was different now, less rigid, more subdued. Her eyes, once filled with righteous indignation, now held a flicker of uncertainty. "Eleanor," she said, her voice barely audible. "Patricia," Eleanor replied, straightening up and wiping her hands on her gardening gloves. "How are you?" I'm not sure," Patricia admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been thinking." "Thinking about what?" Eleanor asked gently. About everything," Patricia replied, her gaze averted. "About the HOA, about the rules, about myself." "And what have you concluded?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm and encouraging. Patricia took a deep breath. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was so caught up in control, in power, that I lost sight of what really mattered. I forgot that this is a community, not a dictatorship." "It's a start," Eleanor replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. I want to apologize," Patricia continued, her voice gaining strength. "For everything. For the petunias, for the threats, for being so unbearable." "Apology accepted," Eleanor said, extending her hand. Patricia hesitated for a moment, then took it, her grip surprisingly firm. What will happen now?" Patricia asked, her voice filled with apprehension. "That's up to you," Eleanor replied. "You can choose to be a part of this community, to contribute to its growth and well-being. Or you can choose to move on." Patricia looked around at the vibrant, colorful neighborhood, at the children playing in the street, at the neighbors chatting over fences. A flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. I want to stay," she said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "I want to be a part of this." "Then welcome," Eleanor said, her smile widening. "Welcome to the new Oak Ridge Estates." Patricia's journey was far from over. She had to rebuild her reputation, to earn the trust of her neighbors, to learn to live without the crutch of power and control. It would be a long and challenging process, but Eleanor believed that she could do it. The transformation of Oak Ridge Estates was a testament to the power of community, to the resilience of the human spirit and to the importance of challenging authority when it becomes oppressive. It was a reminder that even the most rigid structures can be dismantled and that even the most entrenched beliefs can be changed. And it was a celebration of individuality, a declaration that everyone deserves the right to live freely, to express themselves, and to bloom, just like Eleanor's award-winning petunias. The neighborhood slowly learned to trust Patricia again. It wasn't easy. She attended community meetings, volunteering to help with the organization of events. She helped neighbors with yard work and even offered to help new residents navigate the new, simplified community guidelines. She was learning to be a part of the community, not its ruler. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued to be a quiet force of change. She encouraged residents to take ownership of their community, to participate in its governance, and to celebrate its diversity. Oak Ridge Estates was no longer just a collection of houses. It was a vibrant, thriving community, a place where people felt safe, accepted, and empowered. The story of Oak Ridge Estates became a local legend, a tale of a woman who stood up to a bully and transformed her neighborhood into a haven of freedom and individuality. And it was a reminder that even in the most ordinary of places, extraordinary things can happen.